Welcome with Dignity 815 hosts a second event to hear stories of migrants, immigrants, refugees, and asylum seekers.
The nonprofit group of advocates and community members work together to confront and correct what they call lies about immigration to make positive changes in the city of Rockford. The group says a common myth often talked about is immigrants without citizenship are voting in federal elections. Linda Suba of Welcome with Dignity 815 pushes back on that claim by noting it is a federal crime.
Why would anyone risk being thrown into jail or being deported? It's up to every citizen, every concerned citizen, to call their Board of Election and find out what safeguards do you have in place so that non-citizens are not voting.